Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from tonight. What city? What country? What hour it is where you are? History feels different depending on the darkness outside your window. Leave it in the comments. Because this story begins in the dark too. Not battlefield dark. Not the dramatic dark of storms and cannon fire. A quieter dark. The kind found in the margins of paper. In the spaces between names. In the silence where a person should be, and isn't. There is a document. Old. Folded. Salt-stained at the edges. The ink has browned into the color of dried leaves. It is not a letter. It is not a diary. It does not describe feelings, or dreams, or fear. It is a list. Barrels of sugar. Crates of indigo. Livestock. Iron tools. And beneath them, in a tighter hand, squeezed into less space than the cargo. One mail. Sound. No age. No birthplace. No language. No name. Just condition. Healthy enough to work. Healthy enough to survive the crossing. Healthy enough to disappear into ownership. Empires run on details like this. Not the speeches in parliament. Not the flags. Not the generals on horses. They run on quiet ink. On measurements. On bodies reduced to inventory. And somewhere in that system, not at the top, not even near the middle, is a man whose entire existence, for a time, can be summarized as sound. History will not remember that description. But it will remember what he does. Eventually. Not by name. Not properly. But in consequences. Because the British Empire, largest the world had ever seen, will one day be nudged, misled, and quietly wounded. By someone it never counted as a person. The erasure begins long before action. It begins with routine. Morning light through warped glass. A bell. Boots on wood floors. Keys at a belt. Orders are not shouted here. They are assumed. Doors open. Buckets move. Hands carry. Eyes stay lowered. He learns early that visibility is a kind of danger. To be noticed is to be corrected. To be corrected is to be punished. To be punished is to be remembered for the wrong reason. So he practices something else. A stillness that looks like obedience. A quiet that feels like absence. He becomes excellent at being unremarkable. This is not talent. It is adaptation. The empire is a machine that sorts people into categories. Owner. Officer. Merchant. Sailor. Labor. Cargo. The categories decide who speaks. And who is spoken about. He belongs to the last two. But the machine has a flaw. It assumes the people at the bottom are not watching. Ships come and go with the rhythm of breathing. Tar. Salt. Rotting rope. Citrus peels to keep sailors from scurvy. Voices in accents from Bristol, Kingston, Lagos, Lisbon. He moves through these sounds carrying things that are not his. Water. Tools. Ledgers from one desk to another. The ledgers matter. He does not know all the words yet. But he knows numbers. Numbers repeat. Routes repeat. Names of ports repeat. Patterns form long before language does. He cannot write them down. So he stores them somewhere quieter. Empires believe information lives in ink. They forget it can live in memory too. At night, when the lamps burn low and the men with authority grow careless with drink, the air changes. Laughter gets louder. Boots come off. Jackets loosen. Conversations drift. Shipping schedules. Shortages. Rumors of unrest in distant colonies. He moves through the room refilling cups. No one lowers their voice for him. Why would they? Furniture does not gossip. Furniture does not listen. He learns the sound of arrogance before he learns every word of English. It sounds like certainty. Like men discussing the movement of ships as if the ocean were paved stone. Like confidence that people counted as property cannot understand strategy. They are wrong. But they are wrong slowly. And slowness is what saves him. You might expect anger here. Rage. Defiance. Plans whispered in the dark. But that is not how this begins. This begins with observation so patient it almost looks like surrender. Because resistance, for someone in chains, does not always look like striking. Sometimes it looks like remembering. He remembers which officer drinks too much on Thursdays, which clerk forgets to lock a drawer, which captain boasts about new routes before they are announced. He remembers the shape of keys on a ring by sound alone. The difference between footsteps that belong to authority and footsteps that can be ignored. None of this is rebellion. Not yet. It is inventory. The kind not written down. There is a moment. Small, invisible, unmarked in any official record. When a person stops thinking of survival as endurance and starts thinking of it as positioning. It does not feel dramatic. No music swells. No vow is spoken. Just a shift. From how do I get through today? To what are they showing me without realizing it? Empires are loud about power. They are quiet about dependence. They celebrate admirals. They print portraits of kings. They engrave cannons with dates of victory. They do not engrave the hands that carry water to the men who sign orders. They do not record the ears in the room when strategies are spoken carelessly. They do not imagine those ears understanding. This is the first mistake. We still do not know his name. The records that might have held it are lost, burned, misfiled, or never written. All we have are effects that ripple outward later, and the negative space where a person should be. So for now, he remains what the paper called him. Male. Sound. Healthy enough to work. Healthy enough to be overlooked. Healthy enough to stand 3 feet away from the machinery of empire. And begin, quietly, to map it in his mind. History likes beginnings that announce themselves. Declarations. Battles. Explosions. But the beginning of this story is smaller than that. It is a man holding a tray. Eyes lowered. Mind awake. While an empire speaks freely in front of someone it does not consider human. That is where the erasure starts. And that is where the danger begins. Morning does not arrive gently here. It arrives as instruction. A bell that is not loud, but final. Light through high windows that does not warm, only reveals dust. A door unbarred. A bolt drawn back. Day begins when someone with keys says it does. He wakes before that. Not from rest. From habit. The body adjusts to ownership in strange ways. It learns to rise before being summoned, to move before being ordered, to stand before being addressed. Anticipation becomes a form of armor. The room he wakes in has no personal shape. No shelf of keepsakes. No fabric chosen by preference. Only the shared air of men stored between shifts of usefulness. Breathing. Shifting straw. A cough held back because noise can become attention, and attention can become pain. He sits up slowly. Not stiff. Not weak. Measured. He has learned that moving too fast suggests urgency, and urgency invites suspicion. Moving too slow suggests reluctance, and reluctance invites correction. So he moves at the speed of expectation. Outside, the port is already alive in the way only imperial ports can be, not chaotic, not calm, but continuous. Ships do not simply come and go. They circulate. Like blood. Sugar out. Textiles in. Rumors across. People downward. Everything has a direction. Everything has a value. Everyone has a place. His place is mobility without destination. He is assigned where needed: warehouse, dockside, counting room, kitchen yard, stable. The tasks change. The position does not. Always near work. Never near authority. Close enough to serve. Far enough to remain background. It is a geography of usefulness. By mid-morning he is carrying sacks from a storage room to a waiting cart. The sacks are stamped with a symbol he has seen many times, a crowned lion, ink slightly smudged. He does not know heraldry. But he knows repetition. The same mark on crates of muskets. On barrels of salted meat. On sealed envelopes carried under arm by red-coated officers. The lion means distance. It means the thing it marks has traveled far, or will. It means someone, somewhere else, is waiting. Empires stretch by symbols long before they stretch by roads. He runs his fingers briefly over the ink as he lifts the sack. Not to feel the symbol, to feel the thickness of the canvas, the stitching, the weight. Information hides in texture too. A lighter sack means a shortfall. A poorly stitched seam means hurry. Hurry means pressure somewhere else. He is not meant to notice supply strain. But his hands notice for him. At the counting house, numbers rule more absolutely than men. Here, voices drop. Quills scratch. Windows stay open not for air, but for light strong enough to expose error. He enters only to carry ledgers between desks. Never to sit. Never to read. But reading is not always done with eyes. He watches the way a clerk's jaw tightens when a column does not match. He sees ink blotted over a number, rewritten smaller. He hears the change in breath when a total is whispered twice before being recorded once. Shortages do not shout. They whisper through hesitation. He does not know the word deficit. But he knows the feeling of a system trying to appear whole. There are rules here no one writes down. You do not meet the gaze of a man who can sell you. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not show curiosity. Curiosity is interpreted as dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is interpreted as danger. So questions must live entirely inside. He becomes a collector of internal questions. Why does one ship unload quietly at night while another unloads under supervision? Why do some crates go straight to storage while others are sent inland immediately? Why do officers argue in private rooms with doors closed, but laugh loudly outside them? The system teaches him silence. Silence teaches him to observe. Observation begins to teach him structure. At the docks, labor has its own language, one spoken through gesture and rhythm rather than words. A nod means lift. A palm down means wait. A quick glance toward a supervisor means danger. Among the enslaved and the indentured, communication is economical. No one wastes breath on what can be signaled in half a second. Here, he learns something else. Invisibility has layers. To the officers, all doc laboris blur together. To the doc laboris, differences matter. Who can be trusted to hold a rope steady? Who might collapse under weight? Who listens before moving? Trust is not declared. It is tested in motion. He earns small trust. Not through charm. Through reliability. He does not drop cargo. Does not slow the line. Does not draw punishment that spills onto others. In a place where everyone is watched, the safest person is the one who does not cause ripples. He becomes that person. And that is precisely why he begins to hear more. Midday brings heat that presses down like a hand. Work does not stop. It adjusts. Movements become slower but no less required. Voices grow shorter. Tempers thin. This is when officers make mistakes. Fatigue loosens discipline. An argument near a gangplank, two men in uniform, one accusing the other of misreporting cargo weight. Words like shortfall and inspection slip out. The second man glances around, lowers his voice too late. He stands 3 paces away holding a coil of rope. Neither man lowers his voice for him. One gestures sharply toward a ship anchored farther out. Mentions a delay. Mentions orders from London that do not match conditions here. London. He has never seen it. But he hears it daily, as if it were a weather system that dictates tides across oceans. London wants. London expects. London assumes. And here, on planks slick with salt, men scramble to make reality resemble expectation. He files this away. Distance breeds assumption. Assumption breeds vulnerability. Food is distributed without ceremony. A ladle. A bowl. No conversation encouraged. Eating is functional. Talking risks accusation of idleness. Still, in the brief minutes when mouths are occupied and overseers look elsewhere, information trades hands in fragments. A new tax. A rumor of rebellion on another island. A ship lost in a storm that was not on any official list. He does not contribute. He listens. He has learned that the most valuable position in a conversation is the one that leaves no memory. People remember who spoke. They rarely remember who was silent. Afternoons often place him near the stables behind the administrative buildings. Horses of officers are better housed than most men. Brushed. Fed oats shipped from far away. Sheltered from sun. Empires project power through animals too. He cleans hooves, carries water, stands aside as officers mount and ride off to inspect plantations, fortifications, roads. He watches which routes they take most often. Which roads they avoid after rain. Which outposts receive frequent visits. Which ones are neglected. Patterns of attention reveal patterns of fear. Power visits where it feels uncertain. It ignores what it thinks is secure. There is an older man who works the stables, free by paper but not by circumstance. His back is bent permanently forward, as if bowing to a lifetime. He hums while he works. Always the same melody. One afternoon, without looking up, the old man says quietly, "You notice much?" Not a question. A statement. He does not answer. Answering would mean admitting awareness. The old man nods slightly, as if confirmation was never needed. "Best keep it behind your eyes," he murmurs. "World don't like mirrors." Then he goes back to humming. It is the closest thing to advice he has received in years. He follows it. Evenings bring a different danger. Authority relaxes, but control does not vanish. It shifts into unpredictability. Drinking. Gambling. Sudden inspections born from boredom rather than necessity. He learns to read mood like weather. A loud laugh from a balcony means risk below. A slammed door means someone higher up has been angered. Punishments may roll downhill. Unscheduled lanterns lit in offices after dark mean urgent news has arrived. Night work sometimes pulls him into rooms he sees only after sunset. Polishing boots beside a desk covered in maps. Carrying coal for a fireplace while two men argue about shipping lanes. Standing motionless by a door while a clerk reads aloud a letter about unrest inland. Maps fascinate him. Lines for rivers. Dotted paths for roads. Little squares for forts. So simple on paper. So difficult in mud, heat, distance. He cannot study them openly. But every glimpse adds to the map forming in his mind, a map made not of ink, but of effort and delay. Where travel is slow. Where supply lines stretch thin. Where messages must pass through many hands. Empires look seamless from far away. Up close, they are a chain of fragile links. There are moments, rarely, when memory intrudes. A smell that does not belong here. A rhythm tapped unconsciously on a wooden rail. A word from another language whispered in sleep. But memory is dangerous too. Too much of it makes the present unbearable. So he does what many in his position learn to do, he folds the past small enough to carry without dropping the present. Survival first. Meaning later. Back in the sleeping quarters, bodies settle into place like tools returned to a shelf. Exhaustion is not rest. It is shut down. But his mind does not shut down as easily anymore. It replays. The argument about cargo weight. The mention of delayed orders. The frequency of visits to certain plantations. The tension in the counting house. Threads, not yet woven. He does not know what they form. Only that they connect. The world that made him is not defined only by cruelty. Cruelty is present, constant, structural. But the system also runs on paperwork, routine, boredom, overconfidence. It is a machine that assumes the parts at the bottom are interchangeable and unaware. That assumption shapes everything. It means sensitive conversations happen in open rooms. It means keys are left hanging in predictable places. It means movements of goods and men follow schedules visible to anyone nearby. Security exists, but it is aimed upward, against rivals of status. Not downward, against those considered incapable of strategy. This is the blind spot. And blind spots are not dramatic. They are habits. Weeks pass. Then months. Nothing changes. Everything changes. He grows taller. Stronger. More fluent in overheard language. Less visible in the eyes of those who command him. Familiarity breeds erasure. They stop seeing him as new. Then as individual. Then as anything at all beyond function. He refills cups before being asked. Arrives with tools before orders are spoken. Moves out of the way before someone notices obstruction. Perfection in servitude creates a strange freedom. Freedom from scrutiny. And scrutiny is the first wall of defense any power has. Without it, the gates stand open. One night, rain hammers the roofs hard enough to drown conversation. Inside an office, 2 officers and a merchant argue over a table covered in documents weighed down by a pistol. The rain makes them careless with volume. He is there to tend the fire, back turned, face blank. Words drift through the storm noise. Privateers. Supply convoy. Routes changed last minute. Someone talked. The merchant insists the leak could only be from high ranks. The officer scoffs. No one else understands the schedules, he says. No one else understands. The sentence hangs in the air, warm with certainty. He feeds another piece of coal to the fire. Flames flare. Shadows jump. In the shifting light, the map on the table is visible for 3 seconds longer than it should be. 3 seconds is enough. The world that made him believes knowledge flows in one direction. Down as orders. Up as reports. It does not imagine knowledge spreading sideways, pooling quietly where it is not measured. But that is exactly what is happening. Not through rebellion. Not through meetings in secret. Through routine. Through being present in rooms where no one bothers to lower their voice. Through hands that carry more than objects, hands that carry fragments of a system too confident to hide itself. He is still unnamed. Still owned. Still counted as labor, not mind. But inside the structure that confines him, a second structure is forming. Invisible. Unrecorded. Precise. A map of power drawn by someone power does not see. And like all maps, it waits for a moment when knowing the terrain matters more than being allowed to walk it. That moment has not arrived yet. But the world that will make it possible is already in place. Built by routine. Maintained by arrogance. Observed by someone listed only as. Empires prefer the appearance of permanence. They build in stone, write in ink meant to outlast generations, and speak in tones that suggest inevitability. But beneath the surface, even the largest empire is a negotiation between fear and confidence. And negotiations, when strained, begin to show their seams. The strain does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives as delay. A ship expected on Tuesday comes on Friday. A shipment marked complete arrives late. A letter sealed with urgency contains instructions already out of date. Small things. Explainable things. But when they accumulate, they begin to erode certainty. He notices the change first not in words, but in movement. Officers walk faster across the yard. Clerks double-check numbers they would once have trusted. Messengers ride in at odd hours, horses lathered, faces tight. No one announces crisis. Crisis announces itself through impatience. Voices sharpen. Jokes shorten. Doors close more often. The empire is still speaking in the language of control. But its body has started speaking the language of doubt. He moves through this shift the same way he moves through everything else, carrying, watching, silent. Only now, the things he observes do not fit together as cleanly. The counting house once hummed with predictable rhythm. Now it stutters. Ledgers arrive late. Numbers are revised. A clerk mutters that ships are being rerouted without proper notice. At the docks, arguments flare between captains and quartermasters over priority. Sugar rots in humidity while military supplies are rushed through ahead of schedule. Priorities are changing. And when priorities change quickly, someone is afraid. Rumors travel fastest along the lowest paths. Among sailors, dockworkers, cooks, stable hands, the air fills with fragments. A colonial assembly refusing attacks. Militia drilling in secret. A shipment of arms seized before reaching its destination. No one knows the whole story, but everyone senses a tightening. The empire that once expanded outward now turns its attention inward, toward maintaining obedience in places long assumed to be settled. This is the contradiction at the heart of rule by distance. Control weakens the farther it stretches, Yet the illusion of control must grow stronger to compensate. Orders become harsher. Inspections more frequent. Punishments more public. Displays of authority multiply precisely when authority feels most uncertain. He sees a man whipped for arriving late when storms had washed out the road. The punishment is not about timekeeping. It is about demonstration. Pain used as punctuation. A sentence written to reassure onlookers that the system still holds. But reassurance offered too often becomes evidence of anxiety. He watches the faces of the officers during these displays. They look not satisfied, but strained. As if each act of control must now work twice as hard to produce the same effect. Contradiction deepens in the officers' quarters. He brings wine into rooms where maps have begun to change. Lines are redrawn in ink still wet. Notes scribbled in margins. Routes once marked safe now circled with question marks. A captain complains that local guides can no longer be trusted. A merchant insists losses are due to piracy, not unrest. An officer says nothing, just taps a finger over a region inland where shipments have gone missing. They argue about causes. No one argues about consequences. Loss is loss, whatever name it wears. And loss, repeated, undermines confidence faster than any speech. He stands near the wall, eyes lowered, learning the geography of worry. Names of towns. Rivers that flood in certain months. Roads that narrow through forest. He hears frustration directed at invisible enemies. Cowards. Ungrateful. Misled. Words used when power cannot see clearly. The empire is accustomed to fighting armies in uniforms. It is less prepared to confront resistance that looks like absence. Supplies that never arrive. Guides who get lost. Messages delayed by accident. Small acts, dispersed, deniable. Individually, they look like misfortune. Together, they look like a pattern. He recognizes the pattern before the officers do. Because his life has trained him to read systems from below, where patterns are felt before they are named. He understands something the men at the table struggle to accept. Control is loosening not because of one great rebellion, but because of countless small refusals. Refusals that leave no signature. Refusals performed by people long dismissed as background. The same category he occupies. This realization does not arrive as pride. It arrives as calculation. If invisibility can disrupt an empire in small ways, what else can it do? The fracture widens when orders begin to contradict each other. 1 week, all resources are directed toward reinforcing coastal defenses. The next, inland patrols are prioritized. Ships are told to wait for convoy, then scolded for delay. Confusion is not announced, but lived. Sailors grumble that London does not understand conditions here. Officers grumble that local commanders lack discipline. Blame travels in circles. Responsibility dissolves in distance. He sees an officer tear up a letter after reading it, then dictate a reply that omits half the truth. Information is being managed now, shaped to preserve reputation rather than accuracy. When truth becomes negotiable, decisions grow worse. He carries that knowledge the way he carries everything else, without visible reaction. At the stables, the old man who hums has stopped humming. The silence there feels heavier than any song. One evening, while brushing down a horse that arrived with a rider from inland, the old man mutters, "They scared now." He does not ask who they are. It is obvious. Fear at the top feels different than fear at the bottom. At the bottom, fear is constant, personal, immediate. At the top, fear is unfamiliar, abstract, destabilizing. Men unaccustomed to vulnerability make poor decisions when they first taste it. The evidence mounts. A warehouse searched twice in 1 week. A curfew imposed, then quietly ignored because enforcement would halt trade. A proclamation nailed to a post, warning of severe penalties for aiding subversive elements, a phrase so vague it reveals more confusion than clarity. The empire is trying to name a threat it cannot fully see. He understands that condition intimately. For years, he has lived as someone others could not see clearly. Now the blindness has reversed direction. In the counting house, A clerk whispers that an entire convoy vanished along a route considered secure. No wreckage found. No survivors. No official explanation. The loss is recorded as delayed. Language bends before reality does. But only for so long. He notices increased scrutiny in some places, gates guarded, papers checked, and complete carelessness in others. Security has become uneven, reactive. It flares where trouble has already happened, and remains lax where trouble has not yet occurred. Power is always preparing for the last crisis, rarely the next. This inconsistency creates gaps. Gaps in attention. Gaps in patrol. Gaps in certainty. He begins to see the empire not as a wall, but as a net pulled too tight in some places and slack in others. And slack can be slipped through. Still, he does nothing. Not yet. Observation continues. Because acting too early would draw the one thing he cannot afford. Notice. The fracture becomes visible in the behavior of individuals. An officer who once walked the yard with leisurely authority now snaps at minor delays. Another drinks earlier in the day. A third spends long hours alone over correspondence, face pale in lamplight. Authority is performing confidence while privately negotiating doubt. He carries logs past a half-open door and hears a sentence spoken with quiet disbelief. We may not have the men to hold it. Hold what? The word hangs unanswered. But the implication is clear. Holding is harder than taking. And empires are built for expansion more than maintenance. The contradiction sharpens. They possess vast territory, yet struggle to secure the roads between. They command loyalty on paper, yet fear the silence of those they rule. They speak of order, yet react in disorder. Each inconsistency adds weight to the same realization forming in his mind. The system is not as solid as it appears. It only requires enough pressure in the right places to shift. Pressure that does not announce itself. Pressure that looks like routine. Like delay. Like misdirection. Like information arriving slightly altered. He understands these forms of movement. They are the same forms he has used to survive. Small adjustments. Careful timing. Never enough to be traced back. One night, as rain taps against shutters, he refills glasses in a room where a senior official has arrived from across the sea. The man's uniform is immaculate, boots polished to mirror shine. He speaks with the calm certainty of someone who has not yet felt the ground shake beneath him. He assures the others that discipline will restore order. That a firm hand is required. That the disturbances are exaggerated. The local officers nod, but their eyes do not match their agreement. They have seen what he has not. Distance breeds confidence. Proximity breeds doubt. The official leaves the next morning, carrying reports shaped to support his conclusions. Reality remains behind. This, too, is a fracture. The story told upward no longer matches the truth lived downward. Empires crack first in narrative. When those at the top and those below no longer inhabit the same version of events, decisions drift from conditions. And drift leads to disaster. He recognizes the growing gap. And within that gap, space. Space for messages to be delayed. For routes to be misunderstood. For plans to be overheard and quietly diverted. Opportunity does not look like triumph. It looks like imbalance. The system that once seemed immovable now wobbles slightly on its own contradictions. He feels the shift the way sailors feel a change in current before land is visible. Subtle. Directional. Full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Because fracture cuts both ways. Instability creates openings. It also increases risk. Punishments grow harsher as control weakens. Suspicion spreads. Random searches become more common. The same blindness that makes him invisible also makes him vulnerable. Any mistake could collapse years of careful obscurity. So he waits. Watches. Learns the new rhythm of a system under strain. The empire has not fallen. Not even close. But it has begun to doubt itself. And doubt, once introduced, never fully leaves. It lingers in decisions. In overreactions. In the need to prove strength again and again. He continues to move through corridors and yards, through offices and docks, carrying objects that are not his. But now he also carries something else. A growing understanding that the structure around him is no longer stable. That power, when frightened, reveals its inner workings. And that someone who has spent years being unseen may be the only one positioned to move through those exposed mechanisms without setting off alarm. The fracture is not yet a break. But it is enough. Enough to change what is possible. Enough to make the next act imaginable. Even if no one, looking at him, would ever suspect it. Recognition does not arrive as kindness. It arrives as assessment. By now, the system has grown nervous enough to look more closely at its own machinery. Not at the top, where decisions are made, but in the middle, where information passes through human hands. Hands like his. The change is subtle at first. A new officer begins appearing in rooms where supplies are tallied. He is not loud. Not cruel in the theatrical way some men are. He watches. Watches who speaks. Who hesitates. Who seems to understand more than they should. He has the stillness of someone trained to notice small things. The first time their eyes meet, it lasts half a second too long. Not challenge. Not recognition. Measurement. After that, the officer begins to position himself nearby more often. At the edge of the counting room. Near the door when cargo lists are discussed. On the dock during late inspections. Never addressing him directly. Just observing the flow of work and the people who move through it efficiently. Power, when strained, begins to inventory its own tools. One evening, he is told to carry a stack of sealed dispatches to a smaller office he has never entered before. The building sits apart from the others, windows shuttered even in daylight. Inside, the air smells of wax and damp paper. The officer is there. No uniform coat now. Sleeves rolled. Ink on his fingers. Set them down, he says, without looking up. He does. Wait. The word lands differently than orders shouted across a yard. It is quiet, specific. He waits. The officer finishes sealing a letter, presses the signet, lets the wax cool. Only then does he look up fully. You've worked here long, he says. It is not a question. He says nothing. The officer studies his face, not with cruelty, but with calculation. You hear things, he says. Men talk around you. Still, he says nothing. Silence has kept him safe. It remains his first defense. The officer nods slightly, as if this confirms something. Good, he murmurs. That means you know how to keep quiet. This is not praise. It is a job description. Recognition, in this moment, is not rescue from his condition. It is reclassification. From background labor to useful instrument. The officer does not offer freedom. Does not offer reward. Does not pretend this is opportunity. He speaks in practical terms. There are messages, he says, that must move without attracting attention. He gestures toward the window, toward the yard beyond. Uniforms are watched. Clerks are watched. Officers are watched. His gaze returns. You are not. There it is. The truth spoken plainly, without apology. Invisibility, named not as injustice, but as utility. The officer explains the danger without softening it. If you are caught carrying what you should not, no one will claim you. You will be punished as a thief, or worse. No one will admit you were sent. Not a threat. A clarification. Power is most honest when it has nothing to gain from lying. He listens. Not because he trusts the man, but because he recognizes the shape of what is being offered. Not escape. Leverage. A way to move inside the system differently than before. The officer slides a folded paper across the desk. No names inside, he says. Just figures. Deliver it to the quartermaster at the East Warehouse. Say nothing. If he asks who sent you, you don't know. He does not reach for the paper immediately. This is the closest thing to a choice he has been given in years. But it is not truly voluntary. Refusal would be noticed. Noted. Remembered. Acceptance carries risk. Refusal carries a different kind of risk. The system has shifted him into a new category whether he consents or not. He takes the paper. The officer nods once. Good. No smile. No gratitude. A tool picked up and put to use. As he leaves the building, the weight of the folded sheet feels heavier than its size suggests. Not because of what is written on it. Because of what it represents. Movement with purpose. He walks the yard the same way he always has. Same pace. Same lowered gaze. Nothing in his posture signals change. But inside, a boundary has been crossed. For years, he has gathered information unintentionally, as a byproduct of survival. Now, information is being placed in his hands deliberately. He delivers the paper without incident. The quartermaster takes it, glances at the figures, burns it in a lamp flame without comment. No words exchanged. The system has ways of communicating that leave no trace. After that, the requests come irregularly. A note tucked into a crate lining. A verbal instruction to fetch supplies from a specific storehouse at a specific hour, supplies that turn out to be sealed packets handed off behind stacked barrels. Each task small. Isolated. Impossible to see as part of a larger pattern unless you stand where he stands, at the crossing point. The officer never speaks of purpose. Only logistics. Today, you carry this. Tomorrow, you wait near the north gate at dusk. If anyone stops you, you were sent for rope. No ideology. No speeches about loyalty. Just movement. He begins to understand, the Empire is not only fighting visible resistance. It is fighting confusion within itself. Units out of sync. Supplies misrouted. Orders delayed. The officer is trying to stitch communication back together quietly, beneath the level where panic would spread. And he, a man officially considered property, has become part of that hidden thread. Recognition has not made him visible in a human sense. It has made him strategically visible to one man, and still invisible to everyone else. A dangerous balance. With each task, the officer grows more direct. You know the docks better than my men, he says once. You see who comes and goes. Another time, if schedules change suddenly, I want to know before the paperwork does. This is not trust. It is exploitation shaped by necessity. But necessity erodes boundaries. The officer begins asking questions only someone at ground level can answer. Which guard drinks? Which clerk talks too much? Which routes are truly used versus officially listed? He answers carefully, never fully, always as if repeating things any attentive person might notice. He does not reveal the depth of his understanding. Not yet. Because recognition from power is never pure advantage. It is exposure. If the officer falls, or is transferred, or decides he knows too much, protection vanishes. So he gives just enough to remain useful. Never enough to become indispensable. Indispensable people are remembered. Remembered people can be eliminated. One night, the officer speaks more candidly than before. There are men, he says, staring at a map, who believe the empire is held together by fear. He taps the table lightly. They're wrong. It's held together by information. Knowing where things are. When they move. Who controls them? He glances up. Right now, we don't know enough. He does not ask if he understands. He assumes he does not. This assumption remains his shield. The tasks grow riskier. He is sent beyond the usual work areas, into storage rooms near the harbor wall, into offices after hours under the pretense of cleaning. Once, he carries a packet sewn into the lining of a feed sack past a checkpoint where guards barely glance at him. Uniforms are questioned. He is waved through. Each successful passage reinforces the same lesson. Security looks for threats that resemble power. It does not look for threats that resemble obedience. But there is no illusion of safety. He sees what happens when suspicion lands elsewhere. A sailor accused of smuggling is beaten until he cannot stand. A clerk dismissed and jailed for copying figures incorrectly. The margin for error is thin. The officer never promises protection. Only repeats procedures. If stopped, you know nothing. If questioned, you cannot read. If searched, you were sent for grain. Layers of deniability. He is being used because he can be disowned. This is the honesty of the arrangement. And yet, within it, he senses something else emerging. Access. He now moves between spaces previously closed to him. Hears discussions closer to their source. Sees how decisions are made, and how often they are guesses dressed as certainty. Recognition without rescue has given him proximity without status. A position uniquely suited to understanding the system's weaknesses. The officer believes he is employing a silent courier. He is also, unknowingly, educating a strategist. One evening, after a delivery that took him past a rarely used riverside path, he returns with mud on his hem. The officer notices. "You took the lower road," he says. He nods. "Why?" He gestures vaguely. "Less watched." The officer studies him a moment longer than usual. Then nods once. "Good." A small word. But it marks a shift. For the first time, his judgment has been acknowledged, not just his obedience. Still no promise of freedom. Still no change in how the world names him. But within the machinery of empire, a new role has formed around him. Unofficial. Unrecorded. Essential in ways no document would ever admit. He walks back to the quarters that night under a sky thick with clouds, the air heavy before rain. Around him, the port continues its restless motion, ships creaking, chains clinking, voices calling across water. On the surface, nothing has changed. He is still counted as labor. Still sleeps on rough boards. Still answers to bells. But somewhere between being unseen and being used, he has crossed into a different kind of existence. Not free. Not safe. But positioned. And in a system beginning to fracture under its own weight, position is power even when no one dares call it that. The officer has recognized his usefulness. He has recognized the empire's vulnerability. Neither has offered the other rescue. But both have begun to move pieces on a board only one of them fully understands. By the time the work changes, no announcement marks it. No promotion. No ceremony. Just a gradual shift in the kinds of things he is asked to notice, and the kinds of things he is asked to remember. The officer stops handing him sealed notes as often. Instead, he asks questions. Not in offices. Not over desks. While walking. Across the yard. Along the docks. Through the stable rows where the air smells of hay and animal heat. Conversations shaped like passing comments. That warehouse always that busy on Thursdays. Northgate still short a man at dusk. Ships anchoring farther out than usual. He answers in the same tone, flat, unremarkable, as if discussing weather. Yes. No. Depends on the tide. Nothing in his voice suggests analysis. But analysis is happening. He has begun to understand that information is most powerful before it becomes official. Before it is written down. Before it is summarized and sent upward. While it still lives in habit and routine. So he studies routine the way others study maps. He notes which guard lights a pipe before midnight, creating a blind moment at the gate. Which clerk leaves his desk twice each afternoon for the privy, keys left in a drawer. Which dock crews switch shifts late because one foreman drinks too long at midday. Not as gossip. As timing. The officer provides fragments from elsewhere. Convoy leaving earlier than scheduled. Inspection delayed. Orders expected from London, but not yet arrived. He never explains why these things matter. He assumes they do not, to someone like him. This assumption is the foundation of everything that follows. Because he does not simply carry information now. He compares it. Matches dockside patterns with inland rumors. Matches officer anxiety with shipment delays. Matches map lines glimpsed on desks with the mud on passing wagon wheels. A structure emerges in his mind more detailed than any drawn in ink. Not just where things are, but how long they take. Who actually controls them. Where the system relies on trust instead of verification. Invisibility has given him unrestricted observation. Now observation becomes rehearsal. He begins to practice roles in small, harmless ways. Taking slightly longer routes to see who notices. Arriving earlier than expected to test who questions his presence. Carrying objects with confidence through spaces where hesitation would invite scrutiny. He learns the posture of belonging. Shoulders neither hunched nor bold. Eyes unfocused just enough to seem uncurious. Steps steady, never hurried. Authority often detects fear before it detects deception. So he cultivates calm. Not emotional calm that is too deep to reach. Performative calm. The officer begins entrusting him with messages that are no longer written. Tell the quartermaster the shipment is 2 days late, not 1. Let the dockmaster believe the inspection is tomorrow, not today. Small alterations. Tiny distortions of timing. Each one plausible. Each one deniable. He delivers them exactly as instructed. And watches what happens. A crew stands idle for half a day, waiting for a supervisor who never comes. A warehouse delays loading, believing an inspection looms, only to rush later in disarray. Inefficiency spreads outward from minor misinformation like cracks in glass. Not shattering. Weakening. The officer sees disruption. He sees something else, proof. Proof that systems built on assumption can be steered by adjusting expectation. Still, he does not act beyond what he is asked. Not yet. Because transformation through invisibility is not about sudden boldness. It is about understanding the limits of what can be done without being seen. He studies those limits carefully. Which officers verify orders personally? Which rely on subordinates? Which never leave their offices? Who reads every report? Who signs without reading? Who trusts seals? Who trusts faces? Trust, he learns, is the most exploitable resource in any hierarchy. Especially trust extended downward without respect. The officer begins to rely on him not just for delivery, but for interpretation. What did you notice? He asks once, after a long day of confusion at the docks. He answers slowly. Men arguing about space. Too many ships. Not enough hands. The officer nods, already aware of congestion. He adds, Captain from the West Quay sent half his crew ashore. Said he'd wait 2 days. That detail the officer did not know. Small. But useful. The transformation is mutual, though only one of them sees its full extent. The officer believes he is refining a tool. He is, in fact, sharpening a mind that has spent years studying the empire from below. Assignments begin to require initiative. Find out if the road past Miller's Bridge is still passable after the rains. No instructions how. He volunteers to accompany a supply cart under the pretense of labor. Notes the depth of ruts, the broken planks on the bridge, the time it takes oxen to cross. He reports back in simple terms. Cart axle broke. Took 2 hours to fix. Water high. The officer adjusts a route based on that. A decision made in an office now rests partly on his observation. Invisible influence. He never hears the final orders that result. But he sees their effects days later, a convoy diverted, arriving tired but intact. The connection remains unspoken. This is how he learns the final layer of his transformation. Impact without acknowledgement. The officer starts using him to seed expectations in specific places. Tell them the inspection party is thorough. Let it slip that a shipment went missing last week. These planted rumors change behavior. Guards stand straighter where none are coming. Clerks double-check figures that would have been rushed. Attention is a limited resource. Directing it in one place thins it elsewhere. He begins to grasp that misdirection can be more powerful than force. And misdirection is easiest when delivered by someone no one suspects of having intent. He practices neutrality like a second skin. Never eager. Never reluctant. Just present. A vessel for information shaped by others. Outwardly. Inwardly, he is assembling something far more complex. A working model of imperial logistics built entirely from fragments. He knows which ports depend on which supplies. Which garrisons are undersupplied but reported as strong. Which officers hide losses to protect reputation. He knows where truth diverges from record. This knowledge is not yet a weapon. It is potential. Potential that must be timed perfectly. Because invisibility is fragile. One mistake, one question asked too directly, and the illusion of simplicity collapses. So he rehearses restraint. There are things he sees that he does not report. Patterns too large, too revealing. He feeds the officer enough to remain valuable. Keeps the deeper understanding for himself. Not out of rebellion. Out of survival. Power that recognizes usefulness can also fear it. Better to be useful than impressive. One night, while passing through a lamplit corridor, he catches his reflection in a darkened window. For a moment, he sees himself as others do. Plain clothes. Neutral posture. Expression emptied of challenge. A man designed by circumstance to be overlooked. Then he sees what they do not. The constant calculation behind still eyes. The layered map of roads, schedules, weaknesses. The awareness of how easily the empire misreads the quiet. He looks away quickly. Self-awareness is dangerous too. It tempts risk. He returns to routine. But inside, the transformation is complete. He no longer merely survives the system. He understands how to move it. Not with declarations. Not with violence. With timing. With placement. With the careful release or withholding of truth. The officer senses his growing competence, though not its full depth. "You're wasted carrying sacks," he says once, almost absently. It is the closest thing to acknowledgement he will ever offer. Wasted. As if his value exists only in relation to imperial need. The word settles without comfort. Because recognition here still carries no rescue. He is being honed, not freed. And yet, within those tasks lies a narrowing path toward something the officer does not imagine. Agency. Not granted. Constructed. From invisibility, patience, and a system too arrogant to guard against the quiet. The empire believes it is using him to repair its fractures. It does not realize it has placed its internal map in the hands of someone who owes it nothing. Someone who has learned that the most powerful position in any structure is not at the top, but at the unseen intersections where everything passes, and no one thinks to look. He waits there now. Prepared. Unremarkable. Invisible as ever. And finally, capable of turning that invisibility into direction. By the time the work changes, no announcement marks it. No promotion. No ceremony. Just a gradual shift in the kinds of things he is asked to notice, and the kinds of things he is asked to remember. The officer stops handing him sealed notes as often. Instead, he asks questions. Not in offices. Not over desks. While walking. Across the yard. Along the docks. Through the stable rows where the air smells of hay and animal heat. Conversations shaped like passing comments. That warehouse always that busy on Thursdays. Northgate still short a man at dusk. Ships anchoring farther out than usual. He answers in the same tone, flat, unremarkable, as if discussing weather. Yes. No. Depends on the tide. Nothing in his voice suggests analysis. But analysis is happening. He has begun to understand that information is most powerful before it becomes official. Before it is written down. Before it is summarized and sent upward. While it still lives in habit and routine. So he studies routine the way others study maps. He notes which guard lights a pipe before midnight, creating a blind moment at the gate. Which clerk leaves his desk twice each afternoon for the privy, keys left in a drawer. Which dock crews switch shifts late because one foreman drinks too long at midday. Not as gossip. As timing. The officer provides fragments from elsewhere. Convoy leaving earlier than scheduled. Inspection delayed. Orders expected from London, but not yet arrived. He never explains why these things matter. He assumes they do not, to someone like him. This assumption is the foundation of everything that follows. Because he does not simply carry information now. He compares it. Matches dockside patterns with inland rumors. Matches officer anxiety with shipment delays. Matches map lines glimpsed on desks with the mud on passing wagon wheels. A structure emerges in his mind more detailed than any drawn in ink. Not just where things are, but how long they take. Who actually controls them. Where the system relies on trust instead of verification. Invisibility has given him unrestricted observation. Now observation becomes rehearsal. He begins to practice roles in small, harmless ways. Taking slightly longer routes to see who notices. Arriving earlier than expected to test who questions his presence. Carrying objects with confidence through spaces where hesitation would invite scrutiny. He learns the posture of belonging. Shoulders neither hunched nor bold. Eyes unfocused just enough to seem uncurious. Steps steady, never hurried. Authority often detects fear before it detects deception. So he cultivates calm. Not emotional calm that is too deep to reach. Performative calm. The officer begins entrusting him with messages that are no longer written. Tell the quartermaster the shipment is 2 days late, not 1. Let the dockmaster believe the inspection is tomorrow, not today. Small alterations. Tiny distortions of timing, each one plausible. Each one deniable. He delivers them exactly as instructed. And watches what happens. A crew stands idle for half a day, waiting for a supervisor who never comes. A warehouse delays loading, believing an inspection looms, only to rush later in disarray. Inefficiency spreads outward from minor misinformation like cracks in glass. Not shattering. Weakening. The officer sees disruption. He sees something else, proof. Proof that systems built on assumption can be steered by adjusting expectation. Still, he does not act beyond what he is asked. Not yet. Because transformation through invisibility is not about sudden boldness. It is about understanding the limits of what can be done without being seen. He studies those limits carefully. Which officers verify orders personally? Which rely on subordinates? Which never leave their offices? Who reads every report? Who signs without reading? Who trusts seals? Who trusts faces? Trust, he learns, is the most exploitable resource in any hierarchy. Especially trust extended downward without respect. The officer begins to rely on him not just for delivery, but for interpretation. What did you notice? He asks once, after a long day of confusion at the docks. He answers slowly. Men arguing about space. Too many ships. Not enough hands. The officer nods, already aware of congestion. He adds, Captain from the West Quay sent half his crew ashore. Said he'd wait 2 days. That detail the officer did not know. Small. But useful. The transformation is mutual, though only one of them sees its full extent. The officer believes he is refining a tool. He is, in fact, sharpening a mind that has spent years studying the empire from below. Assignments begin to require initiative. Find out if the road past Miller's Bridge is still passable after the rains. No instructions how. He volunteers to accompany a supply cart under the pretense of labor. Notes the depth of ruts, the broken planks on the bridge, the time it takes oxen to cross. He reports back in simple terms. Cart axle broke. Took 2 hours to fix. Water high. The officer adjusts a route based on that. A decision made in an office now rests partly on his observation. Invisible influence. He never hears the final orders that result. But he sees their effects days later, a convoy diverted, arriving tired but intact. The connection remains unspoken. This is how he learns the final layer of his transformation. Impact without acknowledgement. The officer starts using him to seed expectations in specific places. Tell them the inspection party is thorough. Let it slip that a shipment went missing last week. These planted rumors change behavior. Guards stand straighter where none are coming. Clerks double-check figures that would have been rushed. Attention is a limited resource. Directing it in one place thins it elsewhere. He begins to grasp that misdirection can be more powerful than force. And misdirection is easiest when delivered by someone no one suspects of having intent. He practices neutrality like a second skin. Never eager. Never reluctant. Just present. A vessel for information shaped by others. Outwardly. Inwardly, he is assembling something far more complex. A working model of imperial logistics built entirely from fragments. He knows which ports depend on which supplies. Which garrisons are undersupplied but reported as strong. Which officers hide losses to protect reputation. He knows where truth diverges from record. This knowledge is not yet a weapon. It is potential. Potential that must be timed perfectly, because invisibility is fragile. One mistake, one question asked too directly, and the illusion of simplicity collapses. So he rehearses restraint. There are things he sees that he does not report. Patterns too large, too revealing. He feeds the officer enough to remain valuable. Keeps the deeper understanding for himself. Not out of rebellion. Out of survival. Power that recognizes usefulness can also fear it. Better to be useful than impressive. One night, while passing through a lamplit corridor, he catches his reflection in a darkened window. For a moment, he sees himself as others do. Plain clothes. Neutral posture. Expression emptied of challenge. A man designed by circumstance to be overlooked. Then he sees what they do not. The constant calculation behind still eyes. The layered map of roads, schedules, weaknesses. The awareness of how easily the empire misreads the quiet. He looks away quickly. Self-awareness is dangerous too. It tempts risk. He returns to routine. But inside, the transformation is complete. He no longer merely survives the system. He understands how to move it. Not with declarations. Not with violence. With timing. With placement. With the careful release or withholding of truth. The officer senses his growing competence, though not its full depth. "You're wasted carrying sacks," he says once, almost absently. It is the closest thing to acknowledgement he will ever offer. Wasted. As if his value exists only in relation to imperial need. The word settles without comfort. Because recognition here still carries no rescue. He is being honed, not freed. Given sharper tasks, not a different fate. And yet, within those tasks lies a narrowing path toward something the officer does not imagine. Agency. Not granted. Constructed. From invisibility, patience, and a system too arrogant to guard against the quiet. The empire believes it is using him to repair its fractures. It does not realize it has placed its internal map in the hands of someone who owes it nothing. Someone who has learned that the most powerful position in any structure is not at the top, but at the unseen intersections where everything passes, and no one thinks to look. He waits there now. Prepared. Unremarkable. Invisible as ever. And finally, capable of turning that invisibility into direction. By the time the shift happens, no one calls it a turning point. There is no single explosion. No dramatic betrayal shouted across a courtyard. Just a sequence of small, correct adjustments made at exactly the wrong time for an empire already off balance. He begins with almost nothing. A delay of one message by half a day. A correction to a schedule that was never truly confirmed. A quiet suggestion, passed in the tone of rumor, that a certain road is being watched when it is not. Each change is plausible. Each one easily blamed on weather, fatigue, misunderstanding. Individually, they are irritations. Together, they distort timing. And timing is the spine of control. A supply convoy leaves later than intended, arriving at a garrison already rationing food. Officers blame the river level. The river becomes the official explanation. A patrol is redirected toward a reported disturbance that does not exist. The report is traced to a misheard conversation. The patrol returns tired, annoyed, less willing to respond quickly the next time. A shipment of munitions is logged under the wrong warehouse number for a single day. By the time the mistake is noticed, the crates have already been moved inland through unofficial channels no one wants to document too closely. Paper corrects itself eventually. Reality does not wait. He never alters anything large enough to be called sabotage. Only friction. But friction, applied consistently to a strained system, produces heat. And heat produces failure. The officer continues issuing instructions, unaware that the flow of information now passes through a mind that sees further than his own. He still believes he is directing events. In truth, direction has become shared and not equally. The difference lies in what is withheld. He stops reporting certain patterns. A road more vulnerable than the officer realizes. A dock crew sympathetic to unrest inland. A storehouse guarded only by habit, not vigilance. He lets the officer work with partial truth. Not falsehood. Just absence. And absence, in strategy, can be fatal. The empire responds to unrest with force where it can see resistance. Troops march. Cannons roll. Proclamations are nailed to posts. But elsewhere, in the blind spaces between garrisons, along roads considered secure, in towns marked loyal by outdated reports, resistance moves more freely. Messages pass. Supplies shift. People gather. The empire tightens its grip in visible places and loosens it everywhere else. He does not lead these movements. Does not stand in rooms where plans are drawn. His role is smaller. More precise. He ensures the empire never quite sees clearly enough to close its hand at the right moment. An inspection party arrives at a port 2 days after the ships it meant to check have already sailed. Records show the ships were cleared properly. The delay is blamed on a storm that slowed the inspector's carriage. No one notices the conversation in a stable yard that nudged the inspector toward the longer road. A courier carrying revised orders takes the coastal route instead of the inland shortcut, based on a casual remark about bandits. By the time he arrives, the situation the orders were meant to address has changed entirely. The remark came from someone refilling his water. No one remembers that. Failures accumulate. Not catastrophic. But constant. Enough to make commanders cautious. Caution slows response. Slow response encourages bolder resistance. A feedback loop forms, fed by small misalignments. He watches it grow with the same stillness he once used only to survive. Now, stillness hides intent. The officer begins to feel the strain. "We're always behind," he mutters one night, rubbing his eyes over a desk scattered with reports. "Always reacting." He looks at him, as if searching for an answer in a face he still does not fully see. But the answer stands in the room, silent. The empire's greatest weakness is not rebellion. It is delay. And delay has 1,000 fathers no one can name. One of them stands holding a candle, eyes lowered. The moment of visible consequence arrives quietly. A key supply line collapses, not destroyed, just unreliable enough that garrisons begin hoarding instead of sharing. Trust between commanders erodes. Each post starts acting in its own interest, withholding information, exaggerating need. Coordination phrase. What was once a unified structure becomes a collection of anxious outposts. London sends sharper orders. Local leaders send calmer reports. Reality widens between them. In that widening gap, control slips. He does not celebrate. There is nothing to celebrate. Violence still happens. Punishments still fall. Innocent people still suffer under suspicion. He has not broken the machine. He has made it stumble at a time when stumbling is costly. Eventually, the officer is reassigned. Not disgraced. Not promoted. Moved sideways, the quiet fate of men who preside over slow failure no one can quite explain. On his last day, the officer calls him in. "You've been useful," he says, packing papers into a leather case. "Reliable." He pauses, as if considering something more personal, then stops. "Keep doing as you're told," he finishes. Advice. Not gratitude. He leaves without ever knowing how thoroughly his understanding of the situation depended on someone he never considered an equal. The new officials who arrive do not know him at all. To them, he is what he has always been on paper. Labor. Property. Background. They do not ask his opinion. They do not assign him quiet errands. They do not realize how much of the system's recent coherence depended on invisible corrections he once provided. Without those corrections, confusion deepens. Reports contradict more often. Supplies misalign. Opportunities for resistance widen. The empire adjusts, as empires do. It sends more men, more ships, more rules. But it never identifies the subtle internal drift that began before open losses. It will not mention the man who carried numbers in his head more accurately than they were written on paper. He grows older. Not free. Not famous. Still rising at bells. still moving through yards and storerooms. The war, or rebellion, or unrest, depending on who writes the account, eventually reshapes borders, policies, trade. The empire survives, but altered. More cautious. More suspicious. Less certain of its own invincibility. No document links those changes to him. His name, if ever written, does not survive. What survives are outcomes. Convoys that failed to arrive on time. Garrisons that acted without coordination. Opportunities seized by others when imperial response lagged. Historians will call it overextension. Logistical strain. Underestimation of local resistance. All true. None complete. Because inside those broad explanations lived thousands of small human decisions. Some made in council chambers. Some made in silence, by someone no one bothered to question. In the end, he is remembered nowhere official. No pension. No citation. No whispered legend. If his story lingers at all, it does so in fragments, a rumor about a man who knew things, a half-remembered warning not to speak freely around servants, a note in a diary complaining that information seemed to leak from nowhere. History keeps the names of generals. It forgets the listeners in the room. The empire never realizes it was outmaneuvered not by a rival power, but by its own blind spot. By the assumption that a man reduced to inventory could not also be a mind. He lives and dies in the same system that never truly saw him. But the system he leaves behind is not the one he entered. It is more brittle. More aware of unseen threats. Less confident in the silence around it. A change made not through speeches or banners, but through timing, memory, and the careful use of invisibility. There is no monument for that. No date carved in stone. Only a quiet absence in the record where a name should be. And the lingering truth that empires are often shaped most by the people they never thought were looking.